The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the Montana prairie as Beatrice Andrews clutched her handkerchief to her brow, the world spinning around her like a merry-go-round gone mad. It was the summer of 1878, and she had never experienced heat quite like this: thick, oppressive, and unforgiving. The stagecoach had broken down 5 miles back, and the driver had gone for help, leaving her and the other passengers to wait beneath the scant shade of a lone cottonwood tree. One by one, the others had wandered off toward the distant town, but Beatrice, with her heavy carpetbag and Eastern sensibilities, had chosen to wait properly as instructed. Now, as black spots danced before her eyes, she wondered if that decision might cost her dearly. Her corset felt like an iron vise, and her traveling dress, practical by Boston standards, was a torture device in this western inferno. "Madam, you don't look well." The deep voice cut through her dizziness. Beatrice tried to focus on the figure before her, but the sun behind him cast his face in shadow, only the outline of his broad shoulders and Stetson visible. "I'm perfectly fine," she managed, even as her knees buckled beneath her. Strong hands caught her before she hit the dusty ground. "You're about to faint in this heat," he said, guiding her back to the shade. "Lean on me until the world steadies." Beatrice wanted to protest. After all, ladies didn't simply lean on strange men, but her body betrayed her, collapsing against the stranger's solid chest. His arm wrapped firmly around her waist, and she breathed in the scent of leather, horse, and something distinctly masculine. "Thank you," she whispered as he helped her sit on a fallen log. "I fear the heat has gotten the better of me. Not from around here, are you?" There was a smile in his voice as he knelt before her, uncorking a canteen and offering it to her. Beatrice finally got a clear look at her rescuer. Sun-bronzed skin stretched over high cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes the color of a summer sky. His dark blonde hair curled slightly where it met his collar. "I'm Jack Vaughn," he said, watching her sip the water carefully. "Most folks call me Jack." "Beatrice Andrews," she replied, propriety winning over her distress. "I've come from Boston to join my uncle in Silver Creek." Jack Vaughn's eyebrows rose slightly. "Old Henry Andrews is your uncle, the newspaper man?" Beatrice nodded, surprised. "You know him?" "Everybody knows Henry. Silver Creek ain't exactly a metropolis." He glanced around at the empty landscape. "How long you been waiting here?" "Nearly 3 hours," Beatrice admitted, feeling foolish now. "The driver said to stay put." Jack shook his head, a wry smile crossing his face. "That'd be Hank Wilson. Good man, but he probably meant for you to wait about 20 minutes before heading to town yourself." Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the weather. "Oh." The single syllable encapsulated her embarrassment perfectly. "Don't worry about it." Jack stood, dusting off his denims. "My ranch is just over that ridge. I can take you to town, or you're welcome to rest at my place until you're feeling better." Propriety dictated she decline. Her uncle would be expecting her on the afternoon stage, and visiting an unmarried man's home alone would be scandalous, even in this wilderness. But the thought of walking any distance in this heat made her dizzy again. "I believe I should get to town," she said finally. "My uncle will be concerned." Jack nodded as if he'd expected this answer. "Let me get my horse." He whistled sharply, and a magnificent chestnut gelding trotted toward them from where it had been grazing. Jack patted the animal's neck affectionately. "This is Rusty, best cow pony in the territory." Without warning, he lifted Beatrice's carpetbag and secured it to his saddle, then turned to her with those startling blue eyes. "You ever ridden before, Miss Andrews?" "I've taken carriage rides in the park," she replied stiffly. His laugh was warm and not unkind. "Not quite the same thing." Before she could protest, he stepped closer. "May I?" Beatrice nodded, not entirely certain what she was agreeing to until his hands spanned her waist and he lifted her as if she weighed nothing, settling her side saddle on the horse. In one fluid motion, he swung up behind her. "You'll have to hold on to me," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "It's not far, but the terrain's rough." Beatrice sat rigid with embarrassment. In Boston, she wouldn't be caught alone with a man who wasn't family, let alone pressed against him on horseback. But this wasn't Boston, and she suspected the rules of propriety bent differently in the West. Jack clicked his tongue and the horse started forward. Instinctively, Beatrice grabbed Jack's arm as she felt herself sway. His chuckle rumbled through his chest. "You'll get used to it," he promised. "Now, tell me what brings a proper Boston lady to our little corner of Montana territory." As they rode, Beatrice explained how her parents had died of influenza the previous winter, leaving her with little but debts and memories. Uncle Henry, her father's brother and lifelong bachelor, had written offering her a place to stay and work at his newspaper. "I've been teaching at a ladies' academy," she explained, "but the salary barely covered room and board." When Uncle Henry suggested I could help with the paper and perhaps start a proper school here, it seemed providential. Jack nodded thoughtfully. "Silver Creek could use a real teacher. The minister's wife does what she can, but she's got 6 kids of her own to tend to." "And what do you do, Mr. Vaughn, besides rescuing fainting ladies?" His laugh warmed something inside her. "I run the V-Bar Ranch with my younger brother. Cattle mostly, some horses, and it's Jack, please. Mr. Vaughn makes me look around for my father." "Is he here as well?" Beatrice asked. A shadow passed over Jack's face. "No, lost both my parents to a Sioux raid when I was 16. That was 12 years ago now." "I'm so sorry," Beatrice said softly, understanding all too well the pain of being orphaned. "Life out here is hard," Jack said simply, "but it has its rewards." As they crested a small rise, Silver Creek came into view. It wasn't much a main street with perhaps 20 buildings, including a church with a white steeple, a few side streets with modest homes and scattered buildings beyond. "It's smaller than I expected," Beatrice admitted. "But growing," Jack replied. "The railroad's coming through next year and that'll change everything." He pointed to a 2-story building with a sign reading Silver Creek Sentinel. "That's your uncle's place. The newspaper office is downstairs and he lives above it." As they approached, a tall, lanky man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a shock of white hair emerged from the building. Uncle Henry's face split into a grin when he spotted them. "Beatrice," he called, hurrying forward as Jack reined in the horse. "I was getting worried when the stage didn't arrive." "The coach broke down," Jack explained, dismounting smoothly before reaching up to help Beatrice down. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and their eyes met briefly before she turned to her uncle. "Uncle Henry," she said, embracing him. "It's so good to finally meet you in person." Henry Andrews returned the hug awkwardly before stepping back to study her. "You look just like your mother," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. He turned to Jack. "And I see you've met our local hero." Jack's expression turned uncomfortable. "Just happened to be passing by. Miss Andrews was about to faint in the heat." "Well, come inside, both of you," Henry said. "It's cooler and Mrs. Peterson brought over some lemonade earlier." Beatrice glanced at Jack, surprised to find herself hoping he would accept. Something in those blue eyes had captured her interest in a most improper way. "Much as I'd like to, I need to get back to the ranch," Jack said, tipping his hat. "Caleb's probably wondering where I disappeared to." He turned to Beatrice, his expression softening. "Welcome to Silver Creek, Miss Andrews. I hope you'll find what you're looking for here." "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Vaughn." Jack, she corrected herself, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. I'm in your debt. A slow smile spread across his face. I'll remember that. With a nod to Henry, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Beatrice staring after him. He's a good man, Jack Vaughn, Uncle Henry said, picking up her carpet bag. One of the best in these parts. He mentioned a battle with Indians. Beatrice asked, following her uncle into the blessedly cool interior of the building. Henry's expression sobered. The Vaughn boys have had more than their share of tragedy. Their parents were killed in '66, and Jack practically raised his brother from the age of 12. Built that ranch up from almost nothing. He shook his head admiringly. If anyone embodies the spirit of the West, it's Jackson Vaughn. Beatrice nodded thoughtfully, unable to deny the impression the cowboy had made on her. But she hadn't come to Montana to find a husband, she'd come to build a new life on her own terms. Still, as she sipped cool lemonade in her uncle's cluttered office, she couldn't help but wonder when she might see Jack Vaughn again. She didn't have to wonder long. 3 days later, as she was arranging books on the shelves of what would become Silver Creek's first proper schoolhouse, a converted storage room behind the church, the doorway darkened with a familiar silhouette. Heard you were setting up shop, Jack said, holding his hat in his hands. Thought you might need some help with the heavy lifting. Beatrice turned, surprised at how pleased she was to see him. She'd spent the past days meeting townsfolk, learning the newspaper business from her uncle, and trying to establish herself as the town's new teacher. 5 children were already enrolled in her school, set to begin the following Monday. How thoughtful, she said, brushing dust from her apron. Though I believe I can manage. Jack glanced around the room, noting the heavy desk she'd been trying to drag into position. I don't doubt your capabilities, Miss Andrews, but some tasks are easier with help. Without waiting for permission, he moved to the desk and slid it effortlessly across the plank floor to where she'd been struggling to position it. The casual display of strength reminded Beatrice of how easily he'd lifted her onto his horse. Thank you, she said, trying to maintain a professional demeanor despite the flutter in her stomach. And please call me Beatrice. His eyes crinkled at the corners. Beatrice, then. How are you finding Silver Creek? Everyone has been most welcoming, she said truthfully, though I suspect they're simply curious about the Easterner in their midst. It's not often we get newcomers, especially educated ladies, Jack admitted. You're something of a novelty. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Some of the ranch hands were talking about the new schoolteacher, said she was pretty as a picture. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. I'm sure they were just being kind. They weren't wrong, Jack said quietly, his blue eyes holding hers for a moment before he cleared his throat and gestured to the bookshelves. What else needs doing here? For the next hour, they worked together arranging the small classroom. Jack built a simple stand for the water bucket, fixed a wobbly chair, and hung a slate board on the wall. Beatrice found him surprisingly easy to talk to, his quiet humor and thoughtful questions drawing her out. My brother would have benefited from a real school, Jack said as they stood back to survey their work. Caleb's smarter than me, but he had to make do with whatever books we could get and lessons whenever I had time to teach him. How old is your brother? Beatrice asked. 24 now. He handles most of the business side of the ranch. Pride was evident in Jack's voice. He can figure sums in his head faster than most men can write them down. I'd like to meet him sometime, Beatrice said. Jack's expression brightened. You should come out to the ranch for Sunday dinner. We don't put on fancy airs, but our housekeeper, Mrs. Garcia, makes the best beef stew this side of the Mississippi. The invitation was tempting, but Beatrice hesitated. Would that be appropriate? Jack laughed. This isn't Boston, Beatrice. Nobody's going to think twice about the school teacher visiting the Vaughn ranch, especially if your uncle comes along." His expression turned more serious. "Out here, community is what keeps folks going. We look out for each other." "Then I accept," she said, surprising herself. "I'll ask Uncle Henry if he's free this Sunday." Jack's smile was worth any potential impropriety. "I'll send the wagon for you around noon." He put his hat back on, touching the brim in a slight salute. "Looking forward to it." As he left, Beatrice realized she was smiling like a schoolgirl. She quickly composed herself, remembering her purpose in Silver Creek. She was here to teach, to help her uncle, to build a life, not to fall for the first handsome cowboy who crossed her path, no matter how kind his eyes or charming his smile. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a cooler breeze that hinted at the approaching fall. Beatrice dressed carefully in her best day dress, a cornflower blue that her mother had always said brought out her eyes, and pinned her chestnut hair in a simple but elegant style. "You're fussing more than usual," Uncle Henry observed as she adjusted her hat for the third time. "I simply wish to make a good impression," she replied primly. "As the teacher, I represent education and refinement in this community." Henry's knowing smile suggested he wasn't fooled. "Jack Vaughn's a fine man," he said casually. "His ranch is one of the most prosperous in the county, and he's turned down 2 offers to run for mayor." "I'm not interested in Mr. Vaughn's political prospects, Uncle," Beatrice said, though she filed away this information with interest. "Of course not," Henry agreed, eyes twinkling behind his spectacles. "Just making conversation." The wagon arrived precisely at noon, but it wasn't Jack who handled the reins. A younger man with the same strong jawline but darker hair and eyes introduced himself as Caleb Vaughn. "Jack's dealing with a situation at the North Pasture," he explained after the introductions. "Asked me to fetch you and apologize for not coming himself." Disappointment flickered through Beatrice, though she hid it well. "No apology necessary. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Vaughn." "Just Caleb, please," he said, helping her and Henry into the wagon. "Having 2 Mr. Vaughns around gets confusing." During the 5-mile journey to the V-Bar Ranch, Beatrice found Caleb to be as engaging as his brother, though in a different way. Where Jack had a quiet confidence, Caleb possessed an energetic intellect that reminded her of some of the professors she'd known in Boston. "Jack mentioned you're interested in mathematics," she said as they traveled. Caleb's face lit up. "Jack talks about me, does he?" "Nothing too embarrassing, I hope." "Only that you're smarter than him, I believe were his words." Caleb laughed. "Jack's no slouch himself, though he plays the simple cowboy sometimes. He read every book in our parents' collection 3 times over before he was 18. This revelation about Jack intrigued Beatrice. "What sort of books?" "History, mostly. Some Shakespeare. He's got a memory like a steel trap, quotes things at the oddest times." The conversation continued pleasantly until they crested a hill, and the V-Bar Ranch spread before them. Beatrice couldn't hide her surprise. She'd expected something modest, but this was impressive: a large main house built of sturdy logs with a wide porch, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and in the distance, grazing cattle dotting the landscape. "You've built quite an operation," Henry remarked admiringly. "Jack's the one who built it," Caleb said with unmistakable pride. "After our parents died, we could have lost everything, but Jack wouldn't let that happen. He worked from sunrise to sunset, took any job he could find, made deals with neighbors to help with roundups and branding in exchange for their help later." His voice softened. "He was just a kid himself, but he made sure I stayed in school as much as possible while he handled the ranch." As they approached the house, Beatrice spotted Jack emerging from one of the barns, speaking with a ranch hand. He looked up at the sound of the wagon, and even from a distance, she could see his face brighten when he recognized her. He said something to the worker and strode toward them, removing his work gloves. "Welcome to the V-Bar," he called, reaching the wagon as Caleb pulled it to a stop. "Sorry I couldn't come fetch you myself. Had a situation with some strays." Caleb was a perfect gentleman and escort, Beatrice assured him, accepting his hand as he helped her down from the wagon. The brief contact sent a flutter through her chest that she did her best to ignore. Jack turned to Henry, shaking his hand firmly. "Good to see you, Henry." That last editorial about the railroad negotiations was spot on. Henry beamed at the praise. "Just telling folks what they need to know." Jack's gaze returned to Beatrice, and she became acutely aware of her dusty hem and wind-blown hair. "You look lovely," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "Blue suits you." Before she could respond, a plump woman with silver-streaked black hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "There you are. The bread is getting cold and the stew will not wait forever, Mrs. Garcia, our housekeeper and the true boss of the V-Bar," Jack said with affection. "Mrs. Garcia, this is Miss Andrews, our new school teacher, and her uncle, Henry Andrews from the Sentinel." Mrs. Garcia's stern expression softened. "Welcome, welcome. It is about time these boys invited people with culture to dinner." She ushered them toward the house with the efficiency of a cavalry sergeant. "Come, eat. You are too thin," she added, eyeing Beatrice critically. The interior of the ranch house surprised Beatrice again. She'd expected a bachelor's Spartan quarters, but instead found a comfortable, well-maintained home. Polished wood floors were covered with colorful rugs. Sturdy furniture was arranged invitingly around a large stone fireplace, and bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes. "Your home is lovely," she said sincerely. "Mrs. Garcia keeps us civilized," Jack replied with a smile. "Without her, we'd probably be eating off the floor." Mrs. Garcia snorted from the doorway to what was clearly the dining room, "and sleeping with the horses. Now come, before everything is ruined." Dinner was a revelation. The food was simple but delicious: tender beef stew with vegetables from the ranch's garden, fresh bread still warm from the oven, preserved peaches, and a berry pie that melted on the tongue. The conversation flowed easily, with Henry and the Vaughn brothers discussing everything from cattle prices to territorial politics. Beatrice found herself watching Jack when he wasn't looking her way. In this setting, surrounded by the life he'd built, he seemed even more impressive. He spoke thoughtfully, listened carefully, and treated everyone from his brother to Mrs. Garcia with genuine respect. After dinner, Jack suggested a tour of the ranch. Henry begged off, claiming his old bones needed rest, and settled in a comfortable chair with a book, while Caleb excused himself to check some figures in the ranch accounts. "Is a walk too strenuous after such a meal?" Jack asked Beatrice. "Fresh air would be welcome," she replied, reaching for her hat. "You won't need that," he said. "We'll stay close to the house and the sun's not too strong today." Outside, Jack showed her the kitchen garden where Mrs. Garcia grew vegetables and herbs, the smokehouse, and the chicken coop. They stopped at the corral where several horses watched them curiously. "That's Rusty," Jack said, pointing to the chestnut gelding who had carried them to town. The horse trotted over, nickering softly. "He remembers you, does he?" Beatrice asked, hesitantly reaching out to stroke the animal's nose. "Horses are good judges of character," Jack said, watching her. "They know who they can trust." Their eyes met over the horse's head, and something unspoken passed between them. Beatrice looked away first, her heart beating faster than it should. "The ranch is impressive," she said, trying to maintain a conversational tone. "You've accomplished a great deal." "We've been lucky," Jack said modestly. The land is good, the water's reliable, and we've had more good years than bad. Caleb told me what you did after your parents died, Beatrice said softly. That wasn't luck. That was determination and courage. Jack looked uncomfortable with the praise. I did what needed doing. Same as anyone would. Not anyone, she insisted. Most 16-year-old boys would have been overwhelmed. He was quiet for a moment, gazing out over the pastures. There were days I thought we'd lose everything. Nights I stayed awake wondering if I was doing right by Caleb. He shook his head. But giving up wasn't an option. You should be proud, Beatrice said. Jack turned to her, his expression serious. What about you? Coming all this way alone, starting a new life. That took courage too. I had few options left in Boston, she admitted. But I was terrified on that stagecoach journey. I kept thinking I'd made a terrible mistake. And now, Jack asked, his voice gentle. Beatrice smiled. Now I'm beginning to think it was the best decision I've ever made. They continued walking, eventually reaching a small rise that overlooked the entire ranch. The setting sun bathed everything in golden light, turning the landscape into something from a painting. It's beautiful, Beatrice breathed. Yes, Jack agreed, though when she glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the view. The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility. Beatrice knew she should step back, maintain proper distance, but she found herself unwilling to break the spell. Jack finally cleared his throat. We should head back. It'll be dark soon. The ride back to town was quieter, with Henry dozing against the side of the wagon while Beatrice and Jack sat side by side on the bench seat. The gentle sway of the wagon occasionally brought their shoulders or arms into contact, each touch sending a small thrill through her. Thank you for today, she said as they approached Silver Creek, the town's lights twinkling in the dusk. I enjoyed myself tremendously. The pleasure was ours, Jack replied. Mrs. Garcia was beside herself having a proper lady to cook for. She thinks Caleb and I are hopeless cases. Beatrice laughed. You seem to be managing quite well. We get by. Jack hesitated, then added, I was hoping you might attend the harvest dance next Saturday. The whole town turns out for it. Are you asking to escort me, Mr. Vaughn? Beatrice asked, feeling suddenly bold. Jack's smile was visible even in the gathering darkness. I believe I am, Miss Andrews. Then I accept, she said, ignoring the voice of propriety that whispered this was happening too quickly. Though I should warn you, I've never attended a Western dance. Don't worry, Jack said, his voice warm. I'll make sure you don't stumble. When they reached the newspaper office, Jack helped first Henry, then Beatrice down from the wagon. As her uncle fumbled with the door key, Jack took Beatrice's hand, his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles. Until Saturday, he said softly. Until Saturday, she echoed, reluctantly withdrawing her hand as Uncle Henry called for her. That night, lying in her small bedroom above the newspaper office, Beatrice tried to make sense of her feelings. She had come west to establish her independence, to build a career as a teacher, not to lose her heart to a rancher with kind eyes and gentle hands. Yet she couldn't deny the attraction that pulled her toward Jack Vaughn like a magnet to true north. The following week passed in a flurry of activity as Beatrice began teaching. Her 5 students quickly became 8 as word spread about the real Eastern teacher in Silver Creek. The children were a mix of ages and backgrounds, from the mercantile owner's well-dressed daughter to a shy boy from the mining camp outside town, but all were eager to learn. Beatrice found herself rising early each morning, excited to face the day. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and history, adapting her lessons to each child's level. In the afternoons, she helped Uncle Henry with the newspaper, learning to type and write small articles about community events. Throughout the week, little reminders of Jack Vaughn found their way into her life: a bouquet of wildflowers delivered to the schoolhouse on Tuesday, a basket of fresh apples from the V-Bar orchard on Thursday. Each gift came with a simple note, nothing improper, but each made her smile in a way that drew knowing looks from Uncle Henry. By Saturday, Beatrice was both nervous and excited about the harvest dance. She spent extra time preparing, wearing her best dress, a dark green silk with modest lace trim that had been her mother's, and arranging her hair in a more elaborate style than usual. "You look beautiful," Henry said when she descended the stairs. "Your parents would be proud of the woman you've become." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Thank you, Uncle Henry." A knock at the door announced Jack's arrival. When Henry opened it, Beatrice felt her breath catch. Jack was dressed in his finest, a clean black suit with a crisp white shirt, his hair neatly combed, and his face freshly shaved. He looked like a different man from the cowboy who had found her fainting by the roadside, yet his eyes were the same warm and steady as they met hers. "Miss Andrews," he said, his voice betraying a hint of awe, "you look—" He seemed to search for the right word. "Radiant. You clean up well yourself, Mr. Vaughn," she replied, hoping her blush wasn't too obvious. He offered his arm, and after retrieving her shawl, they set off toward the town hall where the dance was being held. Music and laughter spilled out into the night as they approached. "Nervous?" Jack asked, noting her hesitation at the doorway. "A little," she admitted. "Everyone will be watching the new teacher." "They'll only be watching because you're the loveliest woman in the territory," he said with such sincerity that she couldn't doubt him. Inside, the hall had been transformed with autumn decorations, dried corn husks, pumpkins, and colorful leaves arranged artfully around the room. A small band played lively tunes at one end, while tables of food and drink lined the other. Nearly everyone in Silver Creek seemed to be present, from the youngest children to the oldest grandparents. Jack kept his hand at the small of her back as they moved through the crowd, introducing her to those she hadn't yet met. Everyone was welcoming, though Beatrice noticed several young women eyeing her with speculation and perhaps a hint of envy as they noted her escort. "Jack Vaughn rarely attends these gatherings," explained Mrs. Peterson, the minister's wife, when Jack stepped away to fetch them punch. "And he's never brought a lady before. You've caused quite a stir, my dear." Beatrice wasn't sure how to respond to this, but was saved by Jack's return. He handed her a cup of punch just as the band struck up a waltz. "Would you do me the honor?" he asked, offering his hand. Despite her earlier nerves, Beatrice found that dancing with Jack came naturally. His hand was warm and steady at her waist, guiding her effortlessly through the steps. They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years, and Beatrice felt the eyes of the townspeople on them. "Everyone's watching," she murmured. "Let them," Jack replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "I can't blame them for wanting to look at you." The evening passed in a wonderful blur. Beatrice danced not only with Jack, but also with Caleb, Uncle Henry, and several other men from town, though her favorite partners remained the Vaughn brothers. During a lively reel, she found herself laughing more freely than she had in years as Jack swung her around the floor. When the band took a break, Jack suggested they step outside for some air. The night was cool but pleasant, with stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. "I've never seen so many stars," Beatrice said, gazing upward. "One of the best things about Montana," Jack agreed, standing close beside her. "In the summer, sometimes I sleep outside just to look at them." They were quiet for a moment, the music from inside muffled now, creating a small pocket of privacy. "Beatrice," Jack began, his voice low and serious. "I know you haven't been here long, but I want you to know that Jack." "There you are," Caleb's voice cut through the night as he burst through the door. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's trouble. Jamie just rode in from the ranch. Rustlers hit the north pasture." Jack's expression immediately shifted, all softness vanishing as he straightened. "How many cattle?" "At least 30 head, maybe more. They cut the fence by Coyote Creek." Caleb looked apologetically at Beatrice. "I'm sorry, Miss Andrews." "Of course you must go," Beatrice said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Will you be safe?" Jack's expression softened slightly. "Don't worry about us. This happens sometimes." He took her hand briefly. "I'll call on you tomorrow if I may." "Please do," she said. "Be careful." With a nod, he was gone, striding away with his brother toward the livery stable where their horses waited. Beatrice watched until they disappeared into the darkness, a strange foreboding settling over her. Uncle Henry found her still standing there minutes later. "Everything all right?" "I saw the Vaughn boys tear out of here like their tails were on fire." "Rustlers at the ranch," Beatrice explained. "They had to go." Henry's expression grew concerned. "Rustling's been getting worse lately. The sheriff stretched thin with all the new settlements." He patted her arm. "Don't worry too much. Jack Vaughn can handle himself." But worry she did. That night sleep eluded her as she imagined all manner of dangers. By morning she was exhausted but determined to carry on as normal. She attended church with Uncle Henry, then spent the afternoon helping him prepare the next edition of the newspaper. Jack didn't call as promised. Monday came and went with no word from the V-Bar Ranch. By Tuesday, Beatrice was fighting genuine concern, though she hid it well from her students. After school dismissed, she was straightening the classroom when a shadow fell across the doorway. "Miss Andrews." It was Caleb Vaughn, his expression grave. "May I speak with you?" Fear clutched at her heart. "Of course. Is something wrong?" "Is Jack?" "He's alive," Caleb said quickly, seeing her panic. "But he's been shot." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. "How badly?" "Bad enough. We tracked the rustlers to their camp yesterday morning. There was a firefight. Jack took a bullet in the shoulder. The doctor's been out, says the bullet went clean through, but there's risk of fever." Caleb hesitated. "He's been asking for you." "Let me get my things," Beatrice said without hesitation. "Are you sure?" "It's not exactly proper, propriety be damned," she said, then immediately covered her mouth, shocked at her own language. "I'm sorry. But if Jack is asking for me, I need to go." Caleb's expression relaxed into a smile. "You know, I think you might be exactly what my brother needs." After leaving a note for Uncle Henry, Beatrice gathered some basic medical supplies and a book to read aloud, then climbed into Caleb's wagon. The journey to the V-Bar seemed interminable, though Caleb kept the horses moving at a good pace. "The rustlers?" she asked as they traveled. "4 of them. 2 got away, but the sheriff's posse caught the others." Caleb's knuckles whitened on the reins. "The leader is a man named Hardin. He's been hitting ranches all across the territory." When they finally reached the ranch, Mrs. Garcia met them at the door, her normally stern face creased with worry. "He is restless. The fever started this morning." "May I see him?" Beatrice asked, removing her bonnet. Mrs. Garcia nodded, leading her upstairs to what was obviously Jack's bedroom. The room was simply furnished but comfortable, with a large bed, a dresser, and more bookshelves. Jack lay pale and still against the pillows, his bare shoulder wrapped in bandages, a sheen of sweat on his brow. "Jack," Beatrice said softly, approaching the bed. His eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition. "Beatrice, am I dreaming?" "No, I'm here." She sat carefully on the edge of the bed, reaching out to touch his forehead. It was hot with fever. "Caleb came to get me. Shouldn't be here," Jack mumbled, though his hand sought hers. "Not proper." "I don't care about proper right now," she said firmly, squeezing his fingers. "I care about you getting well." A weak smile touched his lips. Bossy schoolteacher. Indeed, she agreed, reaching for the cloth in the basin by the bed. She wrung it out and placed it on his forehead. Now rest. I'll be right here. For the next 2 days, Beatrice barely left Jack's side, taking turns with Mrs. Garcia and Caleb to keep his fever down and make sure he drank enough water and broth. She read to him from one of his books, Ivanhoe, which she discovered was his favorite, and talked quietly about her students, the town, anything to keep his mind engaged when he was lucid enough to listen. On the 3rd day, the fever broke. Beatrice had fallen asleep in the chair beside his bed, her head resting on her arms near his hand. She woke to the feeling of fingers gently stroking her hair. "Jack," she said, sitting up quickly. His eyes were clear for the first time in days, his face still pale but no longer burning with fever. "You're still here," he said wonderingly. "Of course I'm still here," she replied, blinking back sudden tears. "You gave us quite a scare." He struggled to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. Beatrice immediately moved to help him, arranging the pillows behind his back. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 3 days. Caleb's been taking me back and forth to town so I can teach during the day, but—" She hesitated. "I couldn't bear to stay away, not when you were so ill." Jack's expression softened. "You sacrificed your reputation to nurse a broken-down cowboy." "My reputation is just fine," she said tartly. "Uncle Henry has been telling everyone I'm assisting Mrs. Garcia with a family emergency at the V-Bar Ranch." Her voice gentled. "Besides, even if people did talk, it wouldn't matter. Not when your life was at stake." Jack captured her hand in his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Beatrice Andrews, I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment you almost fainted in my arms by that stagecoach." The words hung in the air between them, both shocking and somehow inevitable. Beatrice knew the proper response would be to pull away, to insist they barely knew each other, to remind him that she had come west to be independent, not to lose her heart. Instead, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. It was a brief kiss, tender and sweet, but it changed everything. When she pulled back, Jack was looking at her with such wonder that her heart seemed to expand in her chest. "I should say that was terribly forward of me," she whispered. "Please don't," he replied, his free hand coming up to touch her cheek. "Unless you regret it." "No," she said honestly. "I don't regret it at all." The door opened before either could say more, and Caleb entered with a tray of food. His eyebrows rose at the scene before him, but he simply grinned and set the tray down. "About time," he said cryptically, heading back out the door. "Mrs. Garcia says you need to eat, Jack, or she'll come up here herself and force-feed you." Jack laughed, though it turned into a grimace as the movement jarred his shoulder. "Mrs. Garcia is scarier than any rustler." As Jack recovered over the next few weeks, a new pattern emerged. Beatrice taught during the day, then traveled to the V-Bar in the afternoons to spend time with Jack. As his strength returned, they took short walks around the ranch, their conversations ranging from books to politics to their hopes for the future. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jack took her hand. "I have something to ask you," he said, his expression serious. Beatrice's heart quickened. "Yes. I know this might seem fast by Eastern standards, but out here, life doesn't always give us the luxury of long courtships." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Beatrice. I think I've loved you since that first day when you tried so hard to be proper even though you were about to faint from the heat." He shifted, wincing slightly as his healing shoulder protested, and to Beatrice's shock, he lowered himself to one knee before her. "I'm not a fancy man, and the V-Bar isn't Boston. but I can promise to love you every day of my life, to build a future with you, to support your teaching and anything else you want to do." His blue eyes were earnest as they held hers. "Beatrice Andrews, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes as joy welled up inside her. This wasn't what she had expected when she'd come west, but she realized now it was exactly what she wanted. "Yes," she said, her voice catching. "Yes, Jack Vaughn, I will marry you." His face lit with such happiness that it nearly took her breath away. He rose and pulled her into his arms, his kiss deeper and more passionate than their first, filled with promise and longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "I was so afraid you'd say it was too soon." "Perhaps by Boston standards," she admitted. "But I'm not in Boston anymore, and life is too precious to waste time when you know what your heart wants." They were married 4 weeks later in the Silver Creek Church, with Reverend Peterson officiating. Uncle Henry proudly walked Beatrice down the aisle, and Caleb stood as Jack's best man. The entire town turned out for the celebration afterward, with dancing, feasting, and toasts to the new couple lasting well into the night. Later, as they drove back to the V Bar, now Beatrice's home as well, Jack turned to his new wife with a smile. "Happy Mrs. Vaughn." The name still felt new and wonderful. "Incredibly so, Mr. Vaughn." He tucked a blanket around her against the night chill. "You know, I keep thinking about that day we met. If the stagecoach hadn't broken down, if I hadn't decided to check that fence line that afternoon." "Perhaps it was fate," Beatrice suggested, leaning against his shoulder. "Perhaps," Jack agreed. "Or perhaps it was just lucky that you were fainting in the heat, and I happened to be there to say lean on me until the world steadies." Beatrice smiled, remembering. "The world has certainly steadied, and become so much more beautiful than I ever imagined." As the stars shone overhead and the ranch house lights beckoned them home, Jack kissed his bride again, a promise of the life they would build together in this wild and beautiful land. Over the next 5 years, the V Bar Ranch and Silver Creek grew and prospered together. The railroad came as promised, bringing new settlers, new opportunities, and easier access to markets for the V Bar cattle. Jack and Caleb expanded their operation, buying adjacent land and increasing their herd. Beatrice continued teaching, though now in a proper schoolhouse built by the town. Her original 8 students became 20, then 30 as Silver Creek's population grew. She introduced a lending library, music lessons, and even classes for adults who wanted to improve their reading or arithmetic skills. 2 years after their wedding, Beatrice gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Beatrice's mother. She had Jack's blue eyes and Beatrice's determined spirit, toddling around the ranch house and charming everyone she met. A son followed 2 years later, Henry Jackson Vaughn, named for both his great-uncle and his father. He was quieter than his sister, but just as bright, with a natural affinity for horses that delighted Jack. Life wasn't always easy. There were drought years when the ranch struggled, a scarlet fever outbreak that claimed several lives in town, though thankfully spared the Vaughn family, and occasional conflicts with rustlers or land speculators trying to take advantage of smaller ranchers. Through it all, Jack and Beatrice's partnership remained strong. They faced each challenge together, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating the joys. Their love deepened with each passing year, growing from the quick flame of initial attraction to the steady, enduring heat of true companionship. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jack surprised Beatrice by taking her back to the spot where they'd first met. The old cottonwood tree still stood, though the road was now better traveled with the railroad's influence. "Remember how you looked that day?" Jack asked, helping her down from their buggy. all proper and Eastern, trying so hard not to show how the heat was affecting you." Beatrice laughed, adjusting her hat against the sun. I was determined to be dignified, even as I was about to collapse in a most undignified heap. "You were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen," Jack said, taking her hands in his. "Still are, even with flour on my nose from helping Mrs. Garcia this morning, even with ink stains on my fingers from grading papers," she teased. "Especially then," he insisted, pulling her close. "When you're teaching or mothering our children or helping with the accounts, that's when you're most beautiful to me." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. 5 years of marriage had done nothing to diminish the effect Jack's words had on her heart. "You're still quite charming, Mr. Vaughn." "Only with you, Mrs. Vaughn," he replied, brushing his lips against hers. As they stood together under the cottonwood tree where their story had begun, Beatrice reflected on the journey that had brought her west. She had come seeking independence and a new beginning, never imagining she would find a love story worthy of the novels she cherished. "What are you thinking about?" Jack asked, his arm around her waist as they gazed out at the Montana landscape. "About fate," she replied. "About how sometimes the path we think we're taking leads us somewhere unexpected and wonderful." Jack smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the way she loved. "I'm glad your path led you here, to Silver Creek, to the V-Bar. To you," Beatrice finished, leaning into his embrace. "Most of all to you." As the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, casting golden light across the prairie, Jack drew his wife close and kissed her beneath the cottonwood tree. And Beatrice knew, with absolute certainty, that she had found her true home not in a place, but in the arms of the cowboy who had once told her to lean on him until the world steadied. The world had steadied indeed, and with Jack by her side, Beatrice knew it would remain so for all the years to come.